Yes, so the Lord has been so kind to me, and I'm so passionate about sharing a living and loving Jesus because he has been so real in my life. My experience and my testimony, nobody can argue with your experience and your testimony. I've had people say to me, does God really heal? Does God really still move? And he does. And one thing I am extremely convinced of is that healing is always available. And it's always for us, not because of us, but because of Jesus. But we need to have a right understanding so that we can receive the good that we do not deserve. And so I just want to take a few minutes and share my testimony real quick so that others can believe. I had the privilege of sharing my testimony already this week. I had an interview for Revealing Jesus. And the particular woman that I interviewed, her father had been diagnosed with multiple myeloma for many years. And unfortunately, he did not believe in healing. But this doesn't always have to be our story. And I'm so thankful that God doesn't leave us where we are, but he meets us in such profound ways because that's who he is. He's a God that loves to draw near no matter where we are or what we're going through or how we think we don't deserve it. He is more willing to be present with us than we can even fathom. And that is exactly why Jesus died. That is exactly why the Father sent the gift of the Holy Spirit. And I'm so thankful because I probably wouldn't be standing here today had I not experienced that for myself. So many, many years ago, this was about 9 months after my husband and I were married, and something happened. One night I went to sleep and I just couldn't wake up the next day. I spent the next 3 days barely conscious. I just remember my husband just begging me to drink water. And I just remember, frantic calls to the doctor saying, if she's really that sick, you need to take her to the ER. And so they began to run tests, and they discovered that I had what was called a malignant gammopathy, which meant that cells were duplicating incorrectly with damaged DNA. And this was the beginning of multiple myeloma. And for those of you who don't know, multiple myeloma is a form of blood cancer, and it begins in your bones. And it actually affects your body's ability to fight infections. And this was an incredibly scary time in my life. And what transpired from it, though, was the very reason that I'm standing here today. And so I spent the next 3 days barely conscious, beginning to go through tests. And within a month, about 4 different autoimmune diseases presented themselves out of nowhere. They discovered that I had 4 different opportunistic infections, and basically my immune system had crashed, and they weren't sure what was going to happen to me. And so what was supposed to be a joyful time in my life became very, very scary, obviously. I was in my early 20s, and I thought that I had my entire life ahead of me. I had just gotten married. We had dreams of getting a bigger home and having children, and I was doing well in my career, and everything just stopped. But God. So fast forward a year or so, I began treatment for many of these different things. And they also later discovered that I had Lyme disease as well on top of all of that. And some other heavy metal infections or high levels of heavy metals in my blood. And I got to the point where I had to go out on disability, and they held my job for the 12 weeks, the FMLA period. And they told me, they said, you either need to come back or you need to resign. And I, being the incredibly determined person that I am, thought that I could put mind over matter and will myself to continue to go in to work. But unfortunately, I could not. At that point, my body had just become just something that I could not control. I could not move. I could not will my body to get through life. But I thank God every day that I had a charismatic friend. You see, I grew up Baptist, and although I had a prophetic relationship with God, I knew the voice of God, I knew my Father, I knew Jesus, I did not know the Holy Spirit. But she said to me, there's something more for you. She began to tell me about something called the baptism of the Holy Spirit. And we prayed outside of an ice cream shop. And I was so desperate, and I was so hungry. I said, God, if this is you, I want it and I need it. And she looked at me after we prayed, and she goes, now speak in tongues. She had such a gift of faith, and I love that about her. So I looked at her and I spoke in tongues. And nothing really crazy else happened that night, but I went to sleep, and the next morning I woke up. And the presence of the Lord was so powerfully in my room. I didn't know that he had a presence like that. I had no grid. And so I just remember weeping. And every time I talk about it, it's so hard to not cry, because the kindness of a real and loving God to be so very present in our darkest moments was so incredibly overwhelming. And it still makes me cry that he is here and he doesn't leave. And so, to make a long story short, I gave up my job, and he set me aside, and he began to teach me the Bible, and he began to teach me all about healing and how to freely receive healing, because it wasn't something that I had to earn. It was something that he's already done, and it lit my life on fire, and I've been burning ever since. And so eventually I was at a Holy Spirit conference in 2013, and my friend just happened to have another friend who had just been on a mission trip to Brazil and just had gotten back. And she said to me, hey, let's have my friend pray for you. And I said, okay, yeah, that sounds great. And I started to tell him everything that was happening with my immune system. And she stopped me. And I thank God every day that she stopped me, because he began to get words of knowledge about my immune system, and he began to speak to my bones, and he began to speak to my immune system. And the power of God, I kid you not, it electrocuted me from head to toe. And to be honest with you, it kind of scared me, because I had no idea. I had never heard about the lightnings of God. I had never seen that kind of manifestation of God. But he healed me. Years later, I went back to the doctor just to get a physical, because our health insurance required it to get a better rate. And I went back to the original doctor who found that malignant gammopathy. And he looked at my chart and he said to me, did you ever get this treated? And I said, no, I didn't. And he looked at me and he said, well, it doesn't just go away. And I said, I know, but I don't have it anymore. And he said, okay, listen, because he was a good doctor. He said, listen, we're going to do a blood test, And if it's there, promise me that you're going to get this treated. So we did a blood test. When I walked out of that doctor's office, I just had complete peace. And as I pushed open the doors, it rose up from deep, deep within me. And I just said, I am a sign and a wonder. I waited 2 weeks. I never heard anything from the doctor's office. Eventually I called and I asked for that information to see if it was still there. And the nurse looked through my chart and it was just silence on the other end. She said, there's nothing. It's not there anymore. And I said, okay. Ever since that day, and every day since, I have walked with a living and loving God. Not because of some religious idea, but because He has been closer than a father, closer than a friend, closer than a brother. In every single step of my life, I wish I could tell you that I have faced nothing since then. But everything I faced, I have watched Him overcome and say, not my girl. And I believe that He is more willing to heal, more willing to bless,